We're at Gamescom 2016 and we found another one of these white cubicles. And we're catching up with Todd here from Hi-Rez Studios. And as always, there's a lot to talk about with Todd. I'll let you start. Sort of, what's going on here with you guys at Gamescom? Are you showing anything new, announcing anything, or is it just business as usual?
It's a lot of business as usual. Smite obviously continues to grow for us now. I think since we last talked, not only PC and Xbox One, but now PlayStation 4. So new gods, continued events, just a lot of talking with partners, because as it's continued to grow as an esport, there's a lot of interest in that. So that's a lot of the white cube conversation. And then, we're talking to a bunch of folks about Paladins. So Paladins is the game that we debuted here last year, actually. And it, of course, is our team shooter and a free-to-play version of that. So we're talking to a bunch of people and showing that off as well.
It is interesting, and you mentioned the esports. What's the growth been there for Smite? It's one of those challenging games that's challenging the really big behemoths on the esports scene. How do you see that progressing?
Yeah, fortunately, Smite, because the gameplay is unique, right? A MOBA with aiming. It's found a really nice community, right? So it's not certainly as big as a Dota 2 or League of Legends, but it continues to grow in both team participation, prizing, and viewership as well. So I think if you look at 2015, Smite was the number 4 esport from a player perspective in money paid out. So it was like Dota 2 is way at the top. League of Legends and Counter-Strike are like 2 and 3, and Smite was number 4 all of last year. And so we feel great about that, because those other franchises, some of them are 15 years, 18 years old if you go back to original Dota. And so, being a relatively new game and finding that community is encouraging. And as long as it continues to grow, then we're super happy about that. So it's been good for the game. And also Smite is unique because it's a MOBA you can play on console, and that's a whole separate esports ecosystem. We don't do cross-play intentionally, but we're seeing that find a nice community as well.
That is interesting. How do you go, because it's interesting with esports, like how you go about supporting it and how you go about sort of taking advantage of it, because a game becoming a popular esport is like an opportunity for you guys. How do you sort of look at that?
Well, I think we get a lot of questions since we're a mid-sized developer, but we go pretty hard after esports, and we always say, it's the community that really decides if something is an esport. It's a pull from the community. You can't push it, but you can be there to support it if you see the appetite. So with Smite, we started, very casually with weekend tournaments and giving a little money to community that was organizing it, and now we have 8 team leagues in Europe and North America, and 2 Brazil and Latin America and China and Australia. So it really has grown a lot in 2 years, and we're trying to kind of follow that same path with our new game Paladins. And again, you start by just kind of seeing if the community appetite is there to play it competitively, and then if it is, then obviously we're going to be there to support it.
That is interesting, but is there like a complicating factor as well to like updating a game that's an esport that people have a very sort of fixed opinion on? Because you mentioned like Counter-Strike, that game has been the same throughout, and that's part of why it's popular. How do you sort of is that a challenge?
It's a balance, I think, because with a free-to-play game as a service, the developer likes to put updates in because that helps keep the game interesting, and obviously it supports the business side of the game as well, right, with new things for people to unlock, right, or purchase. So it is a balance, but I think, the games that have been relatively successful, including Counter-Strike, they do it with cosmetics. Obviously, League has changed. Dota 2 just introduced a new champion, right? The first one beyond the original Dota that they introduced at the International, and the same with Smite, and you'll see the same with Paladins. In that, I think that pro players do want the game to stay the same so that they can master it, but we've found that the top players can also adapt. Like, as long as it's not too severe, the changes, and sometimes we test limits, but they are able to adapt. And so we try to have any major changes take place on a season period. So after our World Championship in January, we'll go into Season 4, and we'll make more severe changes. We added the Japanese Pantheon last year, and maybe make some pretty significant meta changes and give the teams time to adjust. And I'm sure we'll have some surprises this year as well. And then when we introduce, say, a new god in Smite, we first put it on the public test server. We get feedback. Then we put it in regular play, but it's not eligible for competitive play. And then after a couple weeks or a new god, then it's eligible for tournament. So it still doesn't mean it's perfect, but it allows some vetting before it's immediately there where money's on the line.
Because one perspective is the players, but the audience may be excited to see what the pro players do with something new, right?
Exactly, and really that's the balance, right? Competitive gaming has been around forever. Since I grew up, people wanted to be the best, and they played. But to me, what grows from competitive gaming to esports is it's interesting enough for spectators to view. And like you say, sometimes there's a lot of excitement about how they're going to use this new god or this new item. So it is a balance between those two.
How would you say that the rise of esports in Smite has influenced the design and the work on Paladins? Are there things that you're sort of maybe it's hard to see that from, but if you think about it, what kind of things do you think it's influenced?
It definitely has. I mean, one, before design, just from a technology perspective, we have a much bigger library of tools to start with. So we spent a long time on spectator mode technology for Smite. We didn't have that when we began. A nice demo system that gives you a tail of the tape that can be reviewed and that content creators can use to do top 5 plays and those sort of things, right? Our player ranking system and matchmaking, it can always get better, like with every game, but we've got a lot of years of tuning of that math. So we come into Paladins with all those in our toolbox that now we can adapt to Paladins, right? We still need a unique spectator view for Paladins because it's a first-person shooter, but we've got all the tools already built for Smite that now we can tweak. So from a technology standpoint, that helps a lot. And I think from a design standpoint, early on in Paladins, it was kind of had some elements of a MOBA, some elements of a shooter, but after working with the community, it is clearly a team shooter now. The mechanics continue to get tuned towards that. So everything from survivability, right? It's pretty quick for me to take you out if I get the jump on you, right? So that time to kill is fast right now. Map design, we've kind of shifted from more open initial designs like a MOBA to more spaces that you would be familiar with in a shooter using elevation and some more choke points. So we try to work with the community early, to kind of get to the essence of the game and then add more characters and more polish. And so with Paladins, I really think it's found that spot now where we have a nice core game mode, a good set of 17 champions, and now we can continue to add more and polish. And even the number of champions we've learned from Smite, that's a key ingredient. If you don't have enough, the game can get stale. Because even with 17, you feel like you might be seeing the same ones often, right? Once you get to maybe 20, 22, it starts to have enough diversity, and of course we'll add more even beyond that as well. So
it is interesting because that sort of hero shooter genre has blown up since we talked last. It's really a different scene these days. What can you say of that, and how do you feel that, because there is that challenge of standing out from what's already there and making sure, because it's two-pronged. Like there are things that people may have gotten used to that you sort of have to have there, but you also have to stand out against it and be unique.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think last time we talked, we talked about the hero shooter. Like Smite took the MOBA and added aiming and dodging, and talked about how we thought there'd be a direction to even more aiming, go all the way first person. And certainly, Team Fortress 2, Overwatch, right? Some others. There's some really strong games in that category. So, the things that we are going to do that are unique, number one, in Paladins, you don't character swap within the match. And so, there's pros and cons, but it's certainly different when you have a picking and banning stage before. And from a spectator standpoint, I know that, okay, you're playing Pip within Paladins, the little guy that shoots AoE, and you're going to be playing Pip the entire match. That actually is easier for a spectator to follow in many cases. Also, there's not two Pips on the same team. That's also easier for a spectator to follow. So that's one significant change. Also, in Paladins, you can modify your character's abilities kind of at the same level as items function in a MOBA. So even though it's a shooter, if you want to play a little more damage dealing play style or lower your cooldowns or have more health and some more interesting buffs as well, you do that through a card system. So if you like a team shooter, but you get attached to a character, really want to master that, and also want to customize it and tweak it just a little bit, that's really the niche that we think makes Paladins different, and we feel like it's going to find a good community of both casual and competitive players that want that change. So I guess art style would be kind of the third element. Many of the team shooters have a pretty accessible kind of cartoony art style, and Paladins does as well, but we're definitely going in a more fantasy direction. So rather than sci-fi, you're going to see archetypes and characters that are just more fantasy, and our environments and our characters will continue to kind of stay in that direction.
Very cool, because I do feel like when you cannot switch the character, it's very important that you can still react to what the landscape is of the game, and that you'll do that with upgrading and abilities and such.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, right now in Paladins, there's two sets of cards. You have a deck building that's your out-of-match tweaking, which gives you different playstyles for the match, and then during the match, we have burn cards. That's like there's like a credit economy in the game, so similar to like a Counter-Strike. I mean, in principle, you're earning some credits based on your performance, and then you can spend those on burn cards, and that lets me counter your playstyle during the match. So those two systems we think will keep the game interesting for people long term, and that of course is really one of the unknowns about this team shooter genre, because there's a lot that are new, but obviously, particularly us as being a free game, we really want people to be invested and play for many months and many years the way they have with Smite. That's going to be the same perspective we bring to Paladin. So a lot of ongoing updates, a lot of events, a lot of interaction with the community and developers. So that's the way we'll look at it.
Interesting. I have to ask, where's Paladins at now? What's going on right now with it? What's the road ahead?
Yeah, it's at a good point. Like I say, the core mechanic is really nice. We're mainly focused on adding a few more maps as soon as possible, because we don't have enough right now. It's a little stale. So the ones we have, the team's done a great job, but we need more. So that's priority one. And then more champions, basically, over time, as well as just more polish of the user interface. So we're basically in a closed beta state, but we expect to move to open beta very, very soon. So I can't give a date, but that's the path, and that's on the PC, which is the best platform for us to work with the community in open beta. But we do intend Paladins to ship on both consoles as well, and so that's also in the not too distant future.
Right, cool, because it is a genre that obviously fits very well on console as well.
Yeah, it works well with a controller already, and again, we see. I mean, clearly there's a lot of console players that like their shooters. So,
absolutely. Well, as always, it's great to talk to you. A pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Awesome. Good to see you guys again. Thanks.